Hello, my friends, and I hope you're having a fantastic day. Today, we are going to talk about basically what happens when a AAA gaming studio begins to die. This is something that is bound to happen eventually, and something I feel a lot of people really are resistant to. As much as it would be great if these studios would learn their lessons and move on and make better products, realistically, all companies disappear eventually. What you're really seeing isn't the result of anything except for a company's inability to identify what their customer wants and give it to them. This happens when a company stops listening to its actual customers and gets their information elsewhere. Market researchers can be helpful, but to rely on them too much is to separate yourself from the people who actually buy your product. The same thing with consultancy firms and everything else. Corporate bloat is another issue in terms of what happens when you are trying to build a business and the overhead ends up much larger than it needs to be. An excellent example of part of this gap would be the difference between Nintendo and Ubisoft. Nintendo has a market cap value of $62 billion and only employs about 7,000 people, while Ubisoft has just $1.6 billion but employs nearly 20,000 people. When you have that many employees, especially when you're based in a very expensive country like France, it costs a great deal of money to be able to pay those people, pay them to government standards, apply benefits to government standards, as well as make sure you're paying your taxes. One of the important parts of business is making sure your employee base does not overrun the amount of profit you are likely to make. In regards to this idea, Ubisoft is completely upside down. Currently, the budgets on their video games are far too large for what they are going to sell. What they need to make off of these games is much larger than what they're going to sell. And the reason they're not going to sell the games they want is because they have stopped listening to the actual customers and instead are spending money on market research and consultancy firms. It doesn't have to be Sweet Baby Inc. It doesn't even have to be that kind of consultancy firm. Consultancy firms are a normal part of business, but how you employ them and what you use them for makes a big difference. And currently, they are not using them appropriately. And that brings me to today's article. Here you see Tencent, Guillemot family said to consider buyout of Ubisoft. This year alone, Ubisoft's value has fallen about 40%, but at the announcement of this idea, their shares actually rose 33%. Now, a lot of people will see this as a win. There are people currently on Twitter celebrating this as a win. You know, Ubisoft is so broken down, they have to sell, so we're winning. Not so much. I mean, realistically, who they're selling out to, Tencent, really has no incentive to change what Ubisoft is doing. At that point, they just gain access to CCP coffers, and the China government will then fund whatever in the world they're doing. Now, we can get all conspiratorial on this and go down an entirely huge rabbit hole, but we're not going to do that. For one, I don't have the proof to back up any of the ideas. And for two, that's not what we're here for. A group of minority shareholders, including AJ Investments, has been pushing for either they take themselves private or they sell Ubisoft to someone like Tencent. AJ Investments actually put out an urgent call for strategic and structural changes at Ubisoft Entertainment. You see this is actually sent to the board of directors and members of committees, Ubisoft Entertainment, Ms. Yves Guillemot, and the CEO and chairman. Also to Tencent, the Guillemot Family Holding, Ubisoft shareholders, KKR, Vivendi, and Blackstone. See here, they believe that it is currently undervalued and it should be worth 40 to 45 euros per share. They have concerns about the future of the company. As many other people have already read this document to death, I am not going to go through it all. I am, however, going to point out some of the things that some other people have noticed within it. These were specifically by Dread Roberts, or the Sickly Ninja. I believe he also has a YouTube channel, so look him up and give him a follow. In his tweet here, he says, "Don't forget that one of the biggest reasons this investor proxy war started is because the investors picked up on the Guillemot and Tencent taking advantage of shareholders and mismanaging the company. They go in depth as to why they believe this is happening. Guillemot and Tencent considering a buyout is likely the result of AJ Investments gaining ground." And here you have the portion in the letter where it says Ubisoft at current state is mismanaged and shareholders are hostages of the Guillemot family members and Tencent who take advantage of them. Like, Roberts just said. This would explain why the Guillemot family is thinking about already selling to Tencent, since they already have the connection. Tencent is already considered extremely pivotal in the Ubisoft situation. Equity firms such as Blackstone and KKR, which were mentioned in the letter, were actually studying potential bids for Ubisoft in 2022. Later that year, however, the founding family partnered with Tencent, which about 49.9% of the Guillemot brothers holding company, in addition to the direct stake it held at Ubisoft. The deal was seen by analysis as a way of keeping suitors at bay, allowing the brothers to remain in control of Ubisoft governance, with Tencent's stake capped below 10% with no operational veto rights. Under the deal, Tencent also couldn't sell its shares in Ubisoft for 5 years, after which the Guillemot family has the right of first refusal. The pact will still allow the brothers to talk and work with whoever they want. So Tencent has already been here bailing them out. These problems that we're seeing now have obviously not just recently come to the surface. When you're talking about businesses this large, these problems are rarely something that happened one day. People didn't just wake up and all of a sudden, oh, here, our business is falling apart. No, it's usually the actions of the higher-ups making poor decisions year after year, which many people will admit Ubisoft has in fact been making poor decisions year after year after year. They had so many opportunities too. And you can see that the investors are very upset about this arrangement between Guillemot and Tencent. Point 2 of their concerns, management and governments. The control exercised in September 2022 by Tencent and the Guillemot family has effectively blocked potential acquisitions and partnerships that could have been beneficial for the company and its shareholders. More recently in 2022, private equity firms such as KKR and Blackstone expressed interest in acquiring Ubisoft, but were unable to proceed due to existing agreements that prevented any single entity from gaining control without Guillemot and Tencent's consent. This pattern of blocking potential acquisitions has prevented the much-needed restructuring and revitalization that will benefit all of the stakeholders of Ubisoft. And this is part of why large companies should not be who you rely on for your games. They're far too busy worrying about what their stakeholders want, how they're going to make the money, how they're going to keep their stakeholders from basically trying to force them to sell themselves off, to actually worry about creating a good game. And that's part of why they end up paying for these firms, because the firms have more time to look at these things supposedly than they do. And so while they're doing this fight, they can get their information from this in between instead of, directly from the customer, because it takes forever to get it from the customer. And then you still have to sort through it, determine who's good, or determine what information's good, determine what information's bad. It's a big headache. It's a lot of work. And when you're separated out from your actual customer, it's even worse. All of this sort of brings me to the question of, why do people think that Tencent buying Ubisoft is a win? When you're talking about an emotional reaction, there really is no logic. So this is one of those things that there is going to be no logic behind. Many people feel that watching Ubisoft go down will avenge their emotions towards losing their favorite franchises to the activists who are currently manipulating gaming. And while to some degree I can understand that, it's not particularly helpful to anybody. In the end, watching Ubisoft die, as it might be, will be a long and slow process, whether they sell to Tencent or not. At this stage, you're looking at just about 20,000 people who are at some point going to have to lose their job. If they sell to Tencent, they're going to end up cutting a lot of bloat. And a lot of people will lose their jobs quickly. There is no such thing as a buy or a merger that doesn't involve layoffs, no matter what the companies buying each other say. There's always some overlap and there's always fat to be cut. And the fact that Ubisoft has let itself become so bloated is a major problem. For me, it's a lot easier for me to be a little blasé about how this will affect gaming, because realistically, I'm not particularly attached to any single Ubisoft property. People who are losing their favorite property, I can understand being far more upset than I am. That said, where do you stand on this? Do you think this is a good thing? Do you think this is a bad thing? Honestly, I think it's a neither thing. I don't see where it's going to be the end of the world, and it's also not going to particularly benefit part of it is, when these companies die, the only thing it's going to leave is a void in the market where someone else can now step in and hopefully create something new and better, because that is how markets work. Companies rise, companies fall, new companies rise, and the cycle continues onward. We are in the middle of what is going to be a nasty bust cycle. And part of that is because companies ended up with some extra support from certain entities that should not be getting involved in markets and weren't allowed to go off into their own good night the way they should, naturally. Of course, Ubisoft could decide not to sell at all, and maybe they'll make a huge turnaround. Who knows? Things happen. The world is strange. Let me know all your thoughts about this down in the comments. I look forward to reading them. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please like, comment, subscribe, and turn on the notifications. If you really liked it, you can feel free to share it around, and I will catch you later.